Here in this slide, you can see the example of constructor. So here I have first created a class called another class, and inside this another class, there I have created three different constructors. The first one is this red colored one, and which is this. Let's do it number one. This is the another class, and this is the constructor 0, which does not have any parameter inside. And when the constructor does not have any parameter, it is called a default constructor. And just to show you the code flow, I have printed one line called in the default constructor, the object is just created. So if the constructor is executed, then this line will be printed. Okay, and after that, I have created a second constructor, which is number 2, which is this yellow colored one, which basically accepts another parameter, one parameter called int var1. Well, you can give any name of your choice, but I have just used int var1. So this is another constructor. This is called the constructor 1, which is called a parameterized constructor. Parameterized constructor means it basically is accepting one parameter. Instead of no parameter, it is basically accepting another one parameter. And here basically I have printed some indicative line to make sure that you understood the concept of parameterized constructor. So here I have wrote like in a parameterized constructor, the object is just created, the first line, then user passes only one parameter while creating the object, and it is of type int, and its value equals var1. So if the value passed by the user for var1 is passed properly, then this here 10 here the value passed by the user should be printed over here. And and then there is a third constructor where basically I have created another constructor which is basically accepting two different parameters. The first one is of type int, and the second one is of type string, which is called constructor 2, which is again also called the parameterized constructor, but this time it is accepting two different parameters. And here again some indicative line to print so that you can just run the program by copy pasting it and directly check the output. So the first line is basically inside the parameterized constructor, and the object is just created. User passes two parameters, so which is for this constructor case, and while creating the object. And here basically just to make it nice, I have printed the value of var1 and var2. So if the user can pass the value of var1 and var2 over here successfully, those values will be printed in here. So now, so these are the constructor inside this another class. Now in order to create the object, I have created the object in here inside this my first class object. So my first class. So inside this my first class, I have this main function, and inside this main function I have created three different objects. Now these three different objects is first one is AC of another class, which is basically not passing any values in here. So it is basically creating an object when constructor 0 is called at that time. In the second example, when I am creating another class AC2 object, there I am basically passing one integer parameter which is 202. Here also it is creating an object, but this time constructor1 will be called, which is this one, because here it is expecting one integer over here, and while creating the object, user is passing the value 202 in here. So that's what happens when you create AC2. In the end, I have created another constructor called AC3 over here of another class, which is basically the where user is basically passing an integer as well called to a value 202 and a string Java while creating the object. At this time, basically, constructor 3 will be called. Why? Because this constructor 3 is basically expecting an integer and a string as parameter, and the user passed it. And so what will be the output of the program is, I will strongly recommend to run it by yourself. You will see that for the first call, for the first object creation over here for this AC, this line will be executed in this constructor. 0 will be executed, and only this line in this default constructor, and the object is just created, it will be printed. For the second object creation, when the user is passing an integer, the second constructor will be executed, and all these lines will be printed with a value of var1 as 202 over here. It should print it here. And the third object, when AC3 is being created with integer as well as a string, this constructor 3 will be executed. All the lines here will be executed, and here the value of var1 should be printed as 202, as well as the value of var2 will be printed as Java, like in here. So I will strongly recommend to copy paste this code in any IDE and check whether you are getting these things as an output or not. It will be great if you can just comment out or comment in some of these object creation to check the result of each of these constructor individually.